Rain hammered against the window of Thomas Bennett's apartment as he stood frozen, staring at the sketchbook in his hands. His breath caught in his throat. The drawing was impossibly detailed, a perfect portrait of a young woman with long auburn hair, a slight scar above her left eyebrow, and a smile that had once lit up his entire world. His daughter, Emma. Emma, who had been dead for 18 months. The sketchbook belonged to a homeless boy named Marcus, no older than 13, who had been sleeping in the alley behind Thomas's bookstore. Thomas had just kicked him out into the storm 5 minutes earlier. Now, holding this drawing, his hands trembled so violently he nearly dropped it. How could this boy, this stranger, have drawn Emma's face so perfectly? How could he have captured the exact angle of her smile? The precise location of that tiny scar she got falling from her bike when she was 7? Thomas grabbed his jacket and ran into the pouring rain. Marcus huddled under a broken awning 3 blocks away, his thin jacket soaked through, his sketchbook the only thing he'd managed to keep dry by pressing it against his chest. When he heard footsteps splashing toward him, he looked up to see the bookstore owner, the man who had just thrown him out, running toward him with wild eyes. Marcus scrambled to his feet, ready to run, but Thomas raised both hands. "Wait. Please, just wait. I'm not going to hurt you. I just need to know something." Thomas held up the sketchbook, now damp from the rain. "This girl you drew, her name is Emma. She's my daughter. She died 1.5 years ago. How do you know what she looks like?" "How could you possibly know?" Marcus's face went pale. He looked down at his worn sneakers, water pooling around his feet. "I don't know, mister. I really don't. I just draw people sometimes. People I see in my head." "You see them in your head?" Thomas's voice cracked. "What does that mean?" "I don't understand it either," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible over the rain. "Sometimes I close my eyes, and there are faces, places, things that feel like memories, but they're not mine. I started drawing them because it's the only way to make them stop for a while." Thomas stared at the boy, his mind racing. "Come with me, please. I need to understand this. Before we go any deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos." Back at the apartment, Thomas wrapped Marcus in a blanket and made him hot chocolate, while the boy sat shivering at the kitchen table. Thomas laid the sketchbook between them and slowly turned through the pages. There were dozens of drawings. Most were faces Marcus claimed he didn't recognize. But then Thomas stopped breathing. Page after page showed scenes he recognized. The coffee shop where Emma worked during college. The park bench where they used to feed ducks every Sunday morning. The intersection where the accident happened. The specific intersection where a drunk driver had run a red light and stolen his daughter's life. "How do you know these places?" Thomas demanded, his voice rising. "I've never been there, I swear," Marcus said. Tears welling in his eyes. "I just see them. I don't know how. I don't know why." Thomas sat back, his mind spinning. He had spent 18 months drowning in grief, pushing everyone away, including his ex-wife Claire, who had tried desperately to help him heal. He had closed the bookstore most days, unable to face the world Emma had been so excited to be part of. And now, this boy, this homeless child, was showing him images that only someone who knew Emma intimately could have drawn. "Can you draw something else?" Thomas asked suddenly. "Something specific if I tell you what I'm looking for?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Sometimes it works like that." "What do you want me to draw?" "Emma had a favorite place, somewhere she went when she needed to think. I only went there once with her, the week before she died. Can you see it? Can you draw it?" Marcus closed his eyes, his small hands gripping the pencil. Thomas watched as the boy's face relaxed, His breathing deepened. Then, almost mechanically, Marcus began to sketch. Lines appeared on the paper. A rooftop, an old water tower, a view of the city skyline. Thomas's heart hammered in his chest. It was perfect. It was Emma's secret place, the abandoned building rooftop she'd found during college, where she'd told Thomas she felt closest to her dreams, the place only the two of them knew about. How? Thomas breathed. How is this possible? Marcus opened his eyes, looking as confused as Thomas felt. I don't know. I really don't. When I close my eyes, sometimes I just know things. I've been on the streets since I was 8. My mom died, and I never knew my dad. For years, I thought I was going crazy. But then I realized that if I drew what I saw, it helped. It made the visions less scary. Thomas studied the boy's face. This child had been surviving alone for 5 years, carrying these strange visions with him, with no one to help him make sense of them. Stay here tonight, Thomas said finally. It's too cold out there. Tomorrow we'll figure this out together. Over the next 3 days, something extraordinary happened. Marcus continued to draw, and Thomas began to piece together a story he'd never known. Emma, in the months before her death, had been volunteering at a youth shelter downtown. She'd never told Thomas, because she knew he'd worry about her safety in that neighborhood. Through Marcus's drawings, Thomas saw Emma's face over and over, always in the same place, the basement of a community center, surrounded by kids. Marcus had been one of those kids. He'd been at the shelter for only 2 weeks, right around the time Emma had started volunteering there. They'd barely spoken. Emma had smiled at him a few times, had given him an extra sandwich once, had asked him about his drawings. Just small moments, forgettable moments. But Marcus, desperate for any kindness in his chaotic life, had remembered her face, had remembered her smile, had remembered the scar above her eyebrow that she'd laughingly told him came from a biking accident. She asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, Marcus said quietly, staring at his drawing of Emma. No one had ever asked me that before. I told her I wanted to be an artist. She said I already was one. She said my drawings were beautiful. Thomas felt tears streaming down his face. She always saw the best in people. I saw her leave that night, Marcus continued, his voice trembling. The night she died, she left the shelter around 9. I was supposed to be asleep, but I was drawing by the window. I watched her walk to her car. She waved at someone across the street. Then she drove away. Thomas leaned forward. Who did she wave at? Marcus shook his head. I don't know. Someone in a dark jacket. I didn't see their face. Thomas felt something shift in his chest. The police had said Emma's death was a random accident, a drunk driver who ran a red light and fled the scene. But they'd never found the driver, never found any witnesses. Marcus, can you draw the person she waved to? The boy closed his eyes again, and his pencil began to move. If this part is making sense, drop a comment with, I'm still here, and let's see who's really watching to this point. The face that emerged on the page was male, mid-30s, with a distinctive tattoo on his neck. Thomas stared at it, trying to place where he'd seen that face before. Then it hit him like a punch to the gut. David Chen, Emma's ex-boyfriend, the one who had become obsessed with her after she ended their relationship 2 years earlier. The one who had shown up at her workplace multiple times until she got a restraining order. The one the police had questioned briefly after her death, but cleared because he'd been in another city that weekend. Or so he claimed. Thomas called Detective Sarah Morrison, the officer who had handled Emma's case. She'd been one of the few people who hadn't given up on finding the hit-and-run driver. I need you to look at something, Thomas said, and I know it's going to sound impossible, but please, just look. Detective Morrison arrived an hour later, skeptical, but willing to listen. Thomas explained everything, showed her Marcus's drawings, explained the connection to the youth shelter and Emma's volunteer work. He showed her the drawing of the man Emma had waved to the night she died. Morrison's expression changed when she saw David Chen's face. "We alibied him out," she said slowly. "He was supposedly at his brother's house upstate that weekend." "Can you check again?" Thomas pressed. "Please?" Morrison looked at Marcus, who sat quietly wrapped in his blanket, then back at Thomas. "I'll make some calls." 3 days later, Detective Morrison called. Her voice was tight with barely controlled excitement. "We found something." Chen's brother admitted he lied about the alibi, said David threatened him. "We pulled traffic cam footage from that night, expanded our search radius. We found Chen's car 3 blocks from the youth shelter. We found damage consistent with a collision. And we found paint transfer that matches Emma's vehicle." Thomas's legs nearly gave out. "You're sure?" "We arrested him an hour ago," Morrison said. "He confessed. Said he'd been following Emma for months, waiting for the right moment. He saw her leave the shelter that night. Followed her. When she stopped at that intersection, he saw his chance. Said it was an accident, that he just wanted to scare her. But we all know the truth. He's being charged with vehicular manslaughter and leaving the scene of a fatal accident." Thomas hung up the phone and turned to Marcus, who was drawing quietly at the kitchen table. The boy looked up. "Did they find him? The person who hurt Emma?" "Yes," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "Because of you. Because you remembered. Because you drew what you saw." Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "I wish I could have stopped it. I wish I'd known what was going to happen." Thomas crossed the room and pulled the boy into a tight hug. "You were just a child. You didn't know. But you helped bring her justice. You helped me find peace. That's more than anyone else could do." Over the next few months, Thomas's life began to change. He reopened the bookstore, dedicating a section to art supplies and hosting free drawing classes for kids from the youth shelter. He started the process to become Marcus's legal guardian, determined to give the boy the stability he'd never had. Marcus continued to draw, but the visions gradually faded as he felt more secure, more grounded in a life that finally felt safe. Thomas learned that Marcus's strange ability was something researchers called hypervigilance, combined with an eidetic memory, likely developed as a survival mechanism during his traumatic early childhood. Marcus absorbed details most people missed, stored them in his subconscious, and they emerged later in his art. Dr. Lisa Chen, a psychologist specializing in trauma, explained it to them during one of Marcus's therapy sessions. Children who experience significant trauma often develop extraordinary observational skills as a protective measure. They learn to read faces, remember details, anticipate danger. In Marcus's case, his artistic talent gave these memories a release valve. He wasn't having supernatural visions. He was processing real memories he didn't even know he'd stored. But supernatural or not, Marcus's gift had changed everything. On what would have been Emma's 25th birthday, Thomas and Marcus stood on the rooftop Emma had loved, the place Marcus had drawn from a memory he didn't know he had. Thomas opened a small wooden box and poured Emma's ashes over the edge, watching them scatter in the wind over the city she'd loved. "Do you think she knows?" Marcus asked quietly. "That we caught the person who hurt her?" "I think if there's any part of her still out here, she knows," Thomas said. "And I think she's grateful to you. I know I am." Marcus looked down at the sketchbook in his hands, the new one Thomas had bought him, filled with fresh blank pages ready for new drawings, new memories, new dreams. "I drew something for you," the boy said, opening to a page near the end. Thomas looked down and his breath caught. It was a portrait of himself and Marcus, standing together, smiling. Behind them, sketched in lighter pencil, almost like a ghost, was Emma. Her hand rested on both their shoulders. Her smile was peaceful. Whole. "When did you draw this?" Thomas whispered. "This morning," Marcus said. "I wasn't trying to draw her. I was just drawing us. But she showed up anyway, like she wanted to be part of it." Thomas pulled the boy close, tears streaming down his face. "She is part of it. She brought us together. She brought us both home." 2 years after that rainy night when Thomas found Marcus's sketchbook, Marcus graduated from high school, with honors and a full scholarship to art school. At the graduation ceremony, Thomas sat in the front row, Claire beside him for the first time in years. They'd found their way back to each other through their shared grief and their shared love for the boy who had helped them heal. When Marcus walked across the stage to receive his diploma, he paused and looked directly at Thomas. He touched his chest, over his heart, then pointed to the sky. The same gesture Emma used to make when she wanted to say, "I love you," without words. Thomas had never taught Marcus that gesture. He'd never mentioned it. But somehow, in the mysterious way that memory and love and connection work, Marcus knew. And in that moment, Thomas finally understood. Emma was gone, but her love wasn't. It lived on in every kind gesture, every moment of grace, every time someone chose to see another person's humanity. It lived in a homeless boy's drawings and a grieving father's second chance at family. It lived in the truth that sometimes, just sometimes, the impossible can lead us exactly where we need to be. What do you think about Marcus's gift? Was it truly supernatural, or just the remarkable power of human memory and observation? And how would you feel if you were Thomas, finding hope in the most unexpected place? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories that prove truth can be stranger than fiction, make sure you're subscribed, because the next one will leave you speechless. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the people who seem to have nothing are the ones who give us everything.